And Derek Jeffries saw me and he said, "Would you like to do something?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Would you like to work backstage?" I said, "Yes." In fact, backstage was more fascinating because I don't think I considered myself talented enough to be front stage. And that's how I got into his lighting team. Now, in the meanwhile, something that I was not part of was the emergence of Bobby Padamsee, who is Alec Padamsee's elder brother, who came to Bombay from England and started what you would describe as the first of the experimental theatre in Bombay.
That would be around 1944?
44, 45, that's right. Yeah. Give or take 1 year in there. Yeah. And he did a little show called Gods and Kings, which is 3 or 4 short plays at the Karma Institute. That was, I think, his first show. And then he followed it up with a production of Othello. Now, I wasn't involved in that. That was before my time. But I saw them, both. And as I said, when Derek sort of asked me whether I would come and muck around with him, I was very happy to do that.
So Derek was already doing theatre?
Yes, Derek was already in the original theatre group, which was the Bobby Padamsee, his 3 sisters.
Yes.
That is Roshan Alkazi, Jerry Sayani, and Derek Jeffries' wife. Well, she was called B, but her name was Shiraz. And so the thing started at Kulsum Terrace, which is where Ryal's headquarters are, up on the terrace over there. Rehearsals used to be there. In fact, pretty much anything that others, because in those days halls were not easy to get. You were lucky if you got, if you got one for 2 days, then you sort of did a dress rehearsal in the morning and did the show in the evening, because there wasn't the money to pay for the hire of halls more than that. So most rehearsals were up on that terrace, and that's where the experimental theatre really started. So, sorry, forgive me if I mix dates, but this goes back to 1945.
Okay.
And then came Bobby Padamsee's untimely death in early 1946, 46, I think. Well, at that time there were 3 bodies in Bombay that staged plays. It was hardly theatre. It was more variety entertainment than. One was the theatre group, which had fallen into Derek's hands for want of anybody else. And there was a thing known as the ADC, which was strictly Parsi, because in those days Parsi girls were not allowed to act with these pagan outsiders, you see. It was called the Amateur Dramatic Circle, and Adi Mazban worked with that. And there was one of these, there were a lot of expatriate British here. So I think they had a little group which used to stage things at the Bombay Gymkhana. But anyway, when Bobby Padamsee died, as a memorial to him, all the 3 groups came together and staged a thing called Music at Night. At that time, J.B. Priestley was very popular. And Music at Night was a joint production of these 3 groups.
So pooling the talents of all 3.
That's right. And there were a couple of people from ADC, 3 or 4 people from the British group, and of course theatre group people. And that was where we were really sort of put to work, because the entire play was done in darkness. Because it is, a cocktail party or something like that, where each person comes alive.
Okay.
And comes out with, all the sort of more intimate details, not meaning his private life, but his, the skullduggery that he may have gone in for. If he was a businessman, the crooked things he did. If he was a coolie, how he measured the loads wrongly or something like that. And each one of them comes alive. And that required very careful spotting, because the entire stage and backstage was in darkness. So this crew of 2 people on the 2 side spotlights and a fellow called Steve Retter at the switchboard, we had to work longer than the cast worked.
And this was done where?
This was done at St. Xavier's College Hall. In those days, everything was St. Xavier's College Hall. You see, St. Xavier's College Hall was the
venue,
the one and only hall. And at that time, there was again a padri who tinkered with these things, who put together the first stereophonic sound system. And you see the two speakers in the front of St. Xavier's College Hall.
Yes.
Those were the first stereophonic speakers, which he had built himself.
Oh.
And Derek Jeffries worked with him because Derek Jeffries was an electrical engineer. And we used to control the lighting. Well, lighting used to be controlled from the stage, but the music used to be controlled from the back of the house. Then we went back to thing, and then Alkazi did, I think, Richard III, and then went off to England. So I think for 3 years there was a bit of a void until he came back. And then when he came back, then, you know, he came with all his new ideas, and he'd spent 3 years in RADA.
And what was happening to these groups in those 3 years?
I think we did little plays. Adi Mazban did a couple of J.B. Priestley's. J.B. Priestley was very popular, you know. So there was music at night.
And who was your audience?
College students, professors, and if you could sell 200 or 300 tickets, we were happy, you know.
And what were they priced
Two
at?
shows, 2 rupees, 3 rupees, 1 rupee, 2 rupees, 3 rupees, maybe.
And the evening slots?
Yeah, usually evenings.
Weekends?
Maybe if the naval mutiny was on or something like that, then you could have Sunday morning shows. I remember during the naval mutiny, which was in September 1946.
Yeah.
We did a show on a Sunday morning, and that was the day Amal Alkazi, who's now
She was
Amal
born.
Alana, she was born. So after the show, we all went off in a sort of this thing to pay our respects to the next generation, to the next generation. You know?
Yes.
And so essentially, it was the Padamsee family, and and of course, in the meanwhile, romances had taken place. And as I said, Alkazi had married one sister, Hamid Sayani had married the second sister, and Derek Jeffries married the youngest of the three. I mean, they were 1, 2, 3, just like that.
Can you give me an idea of the sort of economics involved in a production?
See, the hire of the hall was a big element. That was usually 300 or 400 rupees. Costumes may have been about 2,000 rupees was the average budget for a play. I mean, you scrounged around. And I remember if you wanted to hire a spotlight, you had to pay 50 or 60 rupees for that, just for the use for each day. So we would, again, improvise quite a bit so that we'd use just 2 spotlights. See, St. Xavier's College was fine. The basic lighting was there. It was only the spotting that had to be provided for by, and they had two spotlights of their own. But if we did things elsewhere, like in Jai Hind College, they had no equipment at all. You had to do things for yourself.
So apart from Xavier's, Jai Hind College was
Later on, Jai Hind College came into it, you see, very much. When the Jai Hind College first opened, there was a principal called Advani, and he was very interested in theatre. So he gave us a lot of encouragement, and I think we got the hall cheaper from him. And I think a number of the earlier theatre unit plays were done, theatre group plays were done there.
And we are talking exclusively of English plays?
Yes, that time it was all English.
Okay.
The Hindi came later on. And first of the Hindi came, shall we say, in around in the 1950s. See, then Alkazi came back, and then he took charge. And he was... dictatorial would be a strong word. He was an assertive person, and he wanted things done his own way. And that was the time when Alec Padamsee and Sylvie Dicuna developed ambitions of doing plays their own. And probably at some time or the other, we now jump to about 1953, 54. Alkazi decided that he had enough of these rebels, and he broke away from the theatre group. That was the big split, and formed what was called the theatre unit.
Yes.
And he got a place here on Warden Road, in which is now a tall structure, but in those days was Bhulabhai Desai's old bungalow, which his wife, Soli Batliwala. Yes. His wife converted, had a house right up in front, which is still there, and the rear was Bhulabhai's old bungalow, which was made into the Bhulabhai Memorial Institute.
Yes.
Now, the Bhulabhai Memorial Institute had a stage on the first floor with an open terrace, which was for your audience. On the ground floor, there were rooms which Soli Batliwala allowed us to use for rehearsals. So the first of a number of plays was done over there. Oh, but before that, there was, there was a place called the Institute of Foreign Languages, which is above Fab India, that building, I think. Alkazi did, after he came back, he did two things. He did Murder in the Cathedral, and afterwards a thing called Ghosts, which were small productions in the round, with audience on three sides.
Okay.
And that was in the early 50s. Then we go on to him getting place at the, and then came the break. That was the joint theatre group, and all sorts of experimental things were done. Like, for instance, he did Ghosts, I think, with two casts. Well, on one day one would perform, and another day another would perform. Because you see, he was influenced by rep theatre, and he wanted to, well, shall we say, replicate that here to a certain extent within the limitations of Indian theatre. And it was done in audiences of, I think, 60 or 80 or maybe 100 each day. And we did 14 nights, which was great fun.
That's what I was going to ask you. What was the typical run for these plays? I mean, starting from the mid-40s when...
Well, originally there were 2-3 shows at the most.
Yes.
Then the first of the ones where we did about 14-15 shows was Murder in the Cathedral at the Institute of Foreign Languages. And similarly with Ghosts, I think we did 15 or 16 shows with two casts everywhere. I think Nagish Kazji headed one cast and with Alkazi in it, and Firoza Cooper was the other cast. I've forgotten who was that.
Would you remember if, say, one play the production was on, how long before a director would typically, somebody like Alkazi would typically begin? 2 to 3 months of rehearsals. Okay.
2 months of rehearsals.
So in a year, at least 2 to 3 new plays.
Well, if we could together 2 or 3 shows in a year, we were lucky, you see.
And the constraint would be purely economics? To
Economic,
not doing
the
more?
number of people,
The talent pool.
The logistics, the ability to come to rehearsals, because some were working people, so you could only have rehearsals in the evening. Well, some were college students, so who preferred the afternoons and the early evenings. But, those sort of, but they were gentle constraints. We overcame all that, you see. I mean, we used to rehearse till 10 in the night, which in those days was very late, because we had Morarji Desai was the chief minister, who didn't approve of any activity in the night, you see. I don't know what he did, but still.
And the next day they would go back to work.
Yes. It was all totally amateur.
But it was a gentler city also
Much gentler,
to move around in.
It was a civilized city.
How did you, for instance, how was publicity done? I mean, was it mainly word of mouth?
Notices in the colleges, word of mouth, and maybe a little piece in the newspaper. And in those days, the Times of India used to do reviews of plays. I think later on, the disapproval of that came and Bollywood became the main thing. But for the first 15 or 20 years, you got a review, and reviews were written by people who knew a little, that's why Hindu Saraya and people like that wrote in. And then you had magazines. The Bombay came much later. I think there was a magazine called The Onlooker, which was run by some European woman, I've forgotten. And that used to sort of put pictures from plays. That's it.
So tracing back to Alkazi's return from his drama course in the UK to India, that's when he got into doing theatre with his new ideas the way he wanted
and
to.
That's when he did the first play was Cream Passionnel, which was done at the Jai Hind College. Well, the first innovation that he brought in was that he insisted on starting the thing on time. Something that was never happened, you see. You waited for the audience to come. And if they came half an hour later, then you started after half an hour. He started on the dot. And suddenly people realized that this was serious theatre. And then these Ghosts and Murder in the Cathedral. And then the next year came the big split.
Yes. Can you give me an idea of what the rehearsals were like through the late 40s and before the split? In terms of, how intensive were the readings? How did you get into...
Very intensive. Because... Alkazi brought in a totally new genre, shall we say. You see, before that, first of all, they weren't called rehearsals, they were called practices.
Okay.
And they were school convent, they were called concerts, in fact. They were not called plays.
Yes.
You had school concerts where sometimes even a play would be done.
Yes. So like a skit.
Yeah, it was skit or things like that. This was the first attempt at serious English theatre. In fact, serious theatre. There was the Marathi theatre in Girgaon and things like that, but that was a totally different
world.
Yeah, a world altogether. And we came to that 15 years later, I think.
Did you see those? Did you have
a few of them we saw, because later on Vijaya joined the Theatre Unit School of Dramatic Arts. That was the time Alkazi himself got interested in vernacular theatre. He used to live just around the corner near St. Stephen's Church on a building on the top floor. And he had the use of the terrace. And he built a little theatre of his own on the terrace. Medea, actually. That was the first. And he did that at a National Drama Festival in Delhi.
Okay.
And this was immediately after the split. So that was the first theatre unit play that he did. Medea with Nagish Kasji. And they took that to Delhi.
Okay.
In the meanwhile, Alec and Sylvie were struggling along over here. Alec did Candida. And as it happened, there was an English couple called the Lunds. Alfred Lund and his wife. They came to Bombay with the British Council brought them.
Okay.
And she was known as the Candida of the day.
I see.
So of course we were all invited to a party. We had to get dressed and things like that, and to sort of mingle with them. As an aside to that, there was a character called Kishore Sahu, who used to make Deshi films, and he made a Hamlet of sorts in Hindi.
Really?
Yes, film. Short. I don't know whether it was a short film.
Yeah.
And somebody asked him whether he'd been inspired by Olivier, and he sat like this. And I still remember this. I was sort of a little chokra still, and he said, "No, not really." He's such a hoax, I tell you. Anyway, that's an aside.
Let's try and focus on two things then. If you could give me an idea of your own work behind backstage and how it changed in terms of better facilities over time, and the kind of innovations or the kind of things that you came up with in various productions.
Well, I'm afraid technically it didn't change very much, except for the fact that Derek and a fellow engineer of his from the BST built a portable switchboard, which we could then carry outside. All we needed was the main line, and I think I've got a photograph of that which I can show you afterwards, of taken it at that thing. That was one innovation, and the other innovation then was the coming of the wire recorder. You see, before we used to play Chaviwala records starting with 78s.
Yes.
And LPs had just started. So I think the first, for Music at Night, we used Sibelius, the Sibelius Violin Concerto. And that, I think for that we were able to use LPs. That was the beginning of LPs. And Satyadev College was advanced enough to have put in a 33 RPM music system, thing over there. Thereafter, it was a question of money. If you could hire, then Alkazi himself was wealthy. So I think he bought 4 spotlights, and we used to hire a couple more. But that was the maximum we could go to, 6 for a play. And in those days, spotlights were only used, if there was a soliloquy, you would focus on the thing. Otherwise, you lit up the stage with whatever stage lights you had. You had different combinations, and I remember at the St. Xavier's College switchboard having a whale of a time. They were all plug-in switches, you see. And but that was all there was. And then the real technological breakthroughs, I think, came after I moved out of theatre, you see.
Okay. For instance, if you had to create a soundscape comprising small bits from here and small bits from there, was that possible to do? Or did you have to?
No, we had to cue it from the record initially.
Yes.
Then later on, of course, we put it onto a onto a wire recorder. I think the first one I used was a wire recorder. Later on we get onto tape. Once we got tape, it became easy.
That would have been around.
That was in the 60s, late 50s, early 60s.
Yeah. And what about things like makeup? And were there
makeup was all done by hand. There was a fellow called Joglekar who used to make up film stars. In those days, even film stars were not very opulent, you see. So and he used to come, and he was also taken by theatre. So he would come, and we used to. A lot of us were taught to do our own makeup.
Right. Some of these plays that you've mentioned that Alkazi did, where he brought in a seriousness of approach and a professionalism, as plays, how would you, looking back, would you be able to analyze them from the point of view of a director's vision, creative
No, but they were
vision.
much more serious players. Before that,
So the selection of the
yes,
play
the play
itself.
itself. I mean, you got people like Sartre, and Eliot, and while before that it was nothing but drawing room comedies. The only sort of theatre you had was drawing room comedies and the Parsi Gujarati farce.
Yes, yes. So was there a lot of reading, discussion?
Oh yes, you see, we were converted into an intense lot, and very honestly, the nice thing is the loveliest girls were in theatre. You see, so it was a good place to be for 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and it was a good place to meet, and it was very cosmopolitan. There was, others before that you were always in your own sort of community or your own sect. But in St. Xavier's College and with the theatre, that's where you got to know everybody, you see.
Right. So can we move on now to talking about how this interest in vernacular
Yes.
and Hindi and...
Then what happened was that Alkazi realized that the future of theatre had to be Hindi, it had to be in the vernacular. And he decided to do a play called Andha Yug in Hindi up on his terrace. He, in the meanwhile, had gone and taken Hindi lessons. I think he could speak Hindi because he'd lived in Pune,
Yes.
though he was an Arab, and polished up the sort of theoretical aspects of the language. And he didn't act in it. But that is when people like Amrish Puri, and of course Dubey, and Shenoy was his real Hindi sort of right-hand man, who was, totally devoted to him, totally, and Shenoy managed to start gathering. We had a group of 4 or 5 people who spoke Hindi. One of them was Dubey, who had come as a wild BJP politician. Those days the Jansang, with the Shendi and all the rest of it from Madhya Pradesh, and he wanted to learn English. And so he came, and that is when Alkazi started the theatre group. It was first the Theatre Group School of Dramatic Art, which used to function near the Taj, behind the Regal, the road behind the Regal that leads to the Taj.
Yes.
Off it and there was something over there, I've forgotten, some institute of the other where he managed to get, those days you could get place in the evenings in offices. So where he used to hold classes twice a week or something. And that's how it started. But that was a year before the breakup. And then, of course, the Bhulabhai Institute became the place where the Theatre and School of Dramatic Arts was set up. And then you had Chenoy, Dubey, there was another Firoza Cooper, and of course Kulsum, Alaknanda. So there were a whole lot of these, and they worked in the Hindi part of the thing. But basically Dubey was the man. And that's when Dubey was ambitious. So those were the people, and that's when Elk did the great Antigone, which I think is one of the greatest plays he's ever staged. Antigone originally starred Firoza Cooper, who got married to this Englishman and went off, and has never been on the stage ever since, which is, I think, a loss more of the stage to the stage than, because she's still a very dear friend of ours, you see.
Okay.
To the stage then. And later on he did another production with Kulsum Bell.
Okay.
And Kulsum Bell went to Delhi.
Okay.
And has lived in Delhi ever since. So that's how the theatre thing started. And that's when Dubey got into the act and showed signs of wanting to do things himself. Then came 1961, when I was working in Bhandup at that time, didn't have very much time, except in the evening, so I never took active part in any plays and things like that. But I used to hang around in the late evenings when I came back from Bhandup. Alkazi got this offer from to start the National School of Drama. So one day he upped and went off to Delhi to become.
Just like that? I mean,
it was over a period of a month and 6 weeks. And as it happened, you see, I was always good at accountancy and keeping minutes and things like that. I was the hack man who used to sit at a desk and somehow or the other squeeze enough money to put up, because it was very hard, Then Rohini used to go around and rope her father in to get advertisements and, to finance plays. So I was left with this body, didn't know what to do with it. One day Dubey came. He said, will you trust me? I said, don't be silly, I can't trust an idiot like you. But I looked at him and I decided I could trust him. I said, okay, what do you want? He said, I want the theatre unit name to do a play. I said, how the bloody hell did you think you're going to pay for it? He said, that's my business. I will raise the money. Okay, I said, if you can do that. But I said, naam badnaam mat karna, that's all. And he did.
This is when Alkazi's already left.
Alkazi left. This is the 60s. Alkazi left in 61. So this must be 61, 62. And that's how Dubey came into the way. And from there on, he took over the mantle and he moved suburb-wise. And he went into Marathi theatre and teaching, and because he got from Alkazi. Because Alkazi really believed that you had to spread the message, sort of. So teaching was a very important part of it. That's why the Theatre Unit School of Dramatic Arts, which unfortunately died after he went away. And of course, in between, there was also great support from Nissim Ezekiel, the poet, who just died a couple of years ago. Nissim was a great supporter at the back because he was into advertising and had access to the press. And having access to the press was very helpful. So in the 50s, in fact, when the Theatre Unit School of Dramatic, the Theatre Unit was founded, it was founded with 3 directors. You see, the theatre group was always run by a committee. And the committee had 5 Padamsees and 5 other people on it, including yours truly, you see. And it was democratic, and that's where everyone talked through their hats, or whatever it is. Now, Alkazi didn't approve of that democracy. So he founded a dictatorial thing called the Theatre Unit, of which he was the director. And there were 2 other co-directors, one of which was Nissim Ezekiel, and the other was Soli Bhattiwala of the Bhulabhai Memorial Institute. More for his backing where facilities were concerned than because, of his interest in theatre. He was interested, but, in a very cursory way. While Nissim was a writer more than anything, as a poet and a writer. So he was able to give Alkazi support, and as I said, at that time he was heading Shilpi, the advertising agency, so he had access to press people and things like that. But Alkazi ran for the 6 or 7 years that it was in existence as his over here at the Bhulabhai Memorial Institute. Alkazi ran it with an iron hand, and nobody else was. Once Derek Bond, who was an Englishman, tried to do a George Bernard Shaw play. He nearly slaughtered us, you see, for doing it. And we were treated as rebels and all that. I happened to be in it, you see.
Why was that so?
Well, he didn't approve. He thought Bernard Shaw was,
So he had very clear lines.
Oh yes, he had very clear lines. He was into all the moderns,
Do you think he influenced all of you and people around him at the Bhulabhai Institute in terms of his choice of plays, choice of writers, intellectually, culturally?
Our entire attitude to theatre went up quite a bit. And by that time, we had all sort of started traveling. By traveling, not the way we do now, but we all went on a trip to England. And we took that opportunity to say, for instance, the first time we were there, we saw Alec Guinness, we saw Laurence Olivier, all from the gods.
Yes. But when you say travel, do you mean individually, in your individual capacity, not as a...
Not as... That happened only with Rahul Dikuna managing to get a berth at in Edinburgh. Before that, I don't think Indian... some of the Hindi and other groups have been abroad, but not and that too mainly to the diaspora abroad, not,
Right. Yeah, so culturally he was a huge...
Oh yeah, and theatre certainly. And then he influenced this, thanks to the National School of Drama, all these chaps like Naziruddin Shah and Amrish Puri, they brought in a theatre in which acting became. Acting mattered. Before that, you had to be able to sing or dance or, this here.
So this consciousness of the other language theatres of Bombay came in sort of later. 25
The consciousness started with Alkazi for a very short time, and then Dubey was the chap who really worked. In the meanwhile, there was already a Marathi theatre at the Sahitya Sangh in Girgaon. But that was Marathi theatre, where you had Tendulkar and Shurba Deshpande was one of the early actresses in that. Chitra, that is, who went into film. Amol Palekar, Amrish Puri. Those were all the first lot of Hindi-speaking people that we had in the theatre unit.
Right.
And at that time, Dubey got support. The Doshis he managed to get a lot of support from.
Yes,
and in
at
fact,
Walchand Terrace.
That's right. At Walchand Terrace, he gave them rehearsal facilities and things like that. And that's where the Hindi theatre thing
took off.
That's right.
Yeah.
And he even acted in a couple of plays, I think. Little parts.
This time when Alkazi was at Bhulabhai and, language theatre was creeping into his work, etc., was there interaction with him and all of you with the others in other languages apart from Dubey and other spaces?
A little the Marathi, because thanks to Vijaya, who was in the Theatre Unit School of Dramatic Arts and also had links with the Sahitya Sangh. And there was a Dr. Balerao,
right,
who we met. He came. He would come and talk to us. We went and saw a couple of the plays there. But with Alkazi and him, it may have been a closer relationship. But with us, it was sort of, we were on sort of visiting terms.
What about technical people who were doing technical stuff?
No, not
any
really.
Special?
Nothing.
Right.
We were all amateurs, and you see, we all didn't have very much time. So whatever time we had was devoted to our own organizations. And in fact, because I worked in Bhandup, once 1961 I became reasonably senior in the company.
Yes.
I just didn't have the time to be able to commit myself to rehearsals even late in the evening, because sometimes I'd been in the factory till say 9 o'clock or something like that.
So your links with theatre, actively working on all of this, you would say
61
till 61, and after that what sort of
after Alkazi went away, after that was moral support for years. The theatre, as long as there was a theatre unit, and I think there still is one at least, which Dubey used to resurrect periodically.
Yes.
I think they used to have meetings at our house, and they'd come for blessings and all that sort of the thing. You see, don't be silly. Who the hell am I to bless you?
Right. And have you? I mean, you've kept in touch with the plays that have happened.
Not too much in the last few years. In the last 10 years, I'm afraid we become slack ourselves. It's an effort to make your way all the way to the NCPA. I would like to more. I'd like to see all Rahul's plays, and I'd like to see the thing. But I'm afraid we haven't really. We keep resolving that we will restart, but whenever we meet Sylvia and Nisha Dikuna, and the thing we say that. But beyond things like the reviews that Sylvie did, what was that, Bombay, something, I don't think we've seen very much.
Right. And the 70s, the Walchand Terrace time, when all those plays were happening there with Dubey, did you manage to see a lot of...
Yes, we used to see the finished production. That we used to do.
Right. The way that the big split happened in 1954.
In 1974.
54
rather.
Yeah.
Alkazi decided that he couldn't work with, because there was a lot of revolt. As I said, managing committee meetings used to be chaotic. Alec would say, I want to do something. Sylvie would say, I want to do something. Jerry Sayani would say something else. So he decided he wanted an organization which he could run and control. And that's why he started the theatre unit. And by that time, he had got facilities and he was living on the corner of Warden Road. So that became this time. And the Colaba one was the theatre group. Well, I stayed with the theatre group for a year. But then I found also life rather difficult over there with the don't quote this, but the predominance of the Padamsee family. And thing. And so I also came and started working with Alkazi in the theatre unit. So
you mentioned that Alec and they did a play, they did Othello.
Yeah, they wanted to do their own plays. Yes. Sylvie did Children's Hour. What did Alec do? Alec did Candida, I think.
Candida, yes.
That's right, you see?
Yes. So how would you say that those plays were different from the kind of theatre that
Children's Hour was brave. It was a totally different type of play. And as I said, it touched on a subject which nobody ever talked about previously. I don't think the word lesbian was even known in most English language.
So it was serious theatre.
That was serious theatre. It was. Alex was run-of-the-mill George Bernard Shaw. That was before he started doing exciting things like the musicals and Evita, and before Evita, what I think is greater than Evita, which is Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yes.
That was a great, and we saw it the year it came out in London. So it was fabulous, absolutely.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit about the availability of time slots at Bhulabhai Institute? Because there were so many artists
Bhulabhai
coming
Institute had no big theatre. It was a small place. The upstairs theatre he allowed us to use exclusively for the theatre unit. But that meant during the rains you could only rehearse because only the stage was covered.
Okay.
The auditorium was open.
Okay.
But that was theatre unit property, and that's where he did the House of Bernarda Alba, which is another beautiful play with Nagish Kasji and a whole lot of young ladies.
And then later Andhayu
yes,
would have happened.
the later Antigone. He did Antigone twice.
Right.
Once was in the theatre group days
Okay.
with Hamid Sahani and Firoza Cooper,
Right.
and then in the theatre unit he did it with Kulsum Bell.
Okay.
And it was a repetition of exactly the same production. So in fact, somewhere among my pictures, I've got a picture of Firoza leaning in that white dress, and then a later one of Kusum kneeling in that white dress.
Yes. There were a lot of other young budding artists and writers who used to collect around Bhulabhai.
Oh yes, great.
Can you remember any of
yes.
those meetings and councils?
Hussain was there. Gaitonde used to, after rehearsals.
They were your audience, or they were people?
No, people who used to. You see, Soli Batli Boy was a whimsical character, but he gave a lot of facilities to people. There was a sculptor who was given a little alleyway where he could mess around with his clay, and then there was Gaitonde painting. There was Hussain who had a little attic where he used to paint.
Girish Karnad came.
Yes,
once,
Girish Karnad used to float in. Used to come in and out, visit us, chat, and go.
There were
but
musicians.
He wasn't placed.
No.
There because he didn't. He could write anywhere. He didn't need the people who were placed there were people who needed a place to work. And that's where Hussain and Gaitonde and what was the name of this sculptor? He, I'm afraid, faded away because I think
there were musicians as well.
Yes, there were lots of musicians. It was a cultural, shall we say,
hub.
Hub or place where people could come. And we had a very simple formula. I used to work in Bandup. I used to come with a colleague of mine. We used to go to Breach Candy where there was a superb pani puri wala and a bhel puri wala, have our evening refreshment there, and then go off to the institute where whatever was going on. Most of the time I was struggling with money because I was also the secretary and treasurer of the theatre unit.
And what were the kind of audience sizes that were there for
If we got two houses of 450 people, we were happy.
The terrace accommodated so many?
Terrace accommodated 100. So there we do 4 or 5 shows there. The terrace we only did 2 plays, I think, that I can remember there. Andhayu and Suddenly Last Summer, the last play. Right. And Alkazi went away. So then that was the end of the terrace.